And the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Hello and welcome to the only independent news and opinion program where we chronicle two distinct possibilities, either the demise and possible extinction of the Homo sapien or the greatest leap forward in all of human history. One thing is certain though, there is no status quo. This is the Daily Australian Radio Show, episode number 56 for Monday, March 24th, 2025. My name is Jason Olborn. I am 50% of this brand new news show in episode 56 already. That means we're in week 12, and I'm joined now by the other 50%. Her name, Nicola Charles. Welcome back to the show.
Good morning, Jason. Good morning, listeners. I hope you had a fantastic weekend. I think it's fair to say we are in pandemic 2, and this virus is spreading like wildfire. It's the virus of stupidity, Jason, and there's not much we can do about it, and it's everywhere. It's quite disappointing, I have to say.
You know, I'm glad that you brought that up, the point of stupidity as a benchmark for the understanding of where we are. Over the weekend, and we all have stories to share over the weekend, but my youngest is self-taught at crochet, and she's brilliant at it. She's only 9 years old, and she just completely picked up this concept, is developing it at a rate of knots, and has decided to literally crochet herself a blanket for winter for her bed. And it's quite substantial. So she's wandering around the house with this thing wrapped around her neck as she's crocheting. And I explained to her that she was an autodidact. She was self-taught.
Yeah.
And she looked at me and her eyes just, widened, and she wanted to know more information about what that meant. And I said, this is what we all are today. This is the opposite of the term conspiracy theorist. For what the stupid people want to tell you, the ones that don't want to do any work and want to be spoon-fed everything, is that all of us arrived at where we are, and every single person, I guarantee, apart from the spies listening into the show today, are in one way or another autodidacts, completely self-taught.
Yes.
And what's so interesting about this is we're going to talk about politics and elections certainly in this hour, is that when we get to election day, we're looking for an organisation to support that is also filled with autodidacts. But here's the point. Our political movement has to teach itself how to win. And right now, we're in a jostle to impress upon the people who aren't self-taught to become self-taught. So in other words, it's part of a process. So I feel like as we move into this election cycle once again, that we're going to have to realise at some point we are going to have to teach ourselves the best method for victory. It's one thing to say that we're self-taught and show the system that it's broken and therefore ask the system to kamikaze itself, to take itself out, which it won't, because that's not what it's about. It's a cross of beliefs. So therefore we have to get into the system and we have to change the system from within the system as opposed to asking it to implode on itself if we can't get to the situation where the institutions are going to expose the reasons why it has to be brought down in the first place. So in other words, you've got to get in. And when you look at it, that's exactly what happened in the US with that administration, when you have an outsider getting in to change it, and we can see it every day by the resistance against that. And so therefore, Trump, the ultimate autodidact, so completely self-taught in everything he does, gets himself to that top position and is now at a stage where he's battling against activist judges, for instance, who are unelected, who are appointed, who want to circumvent his policy decisions. So that's my take on the whole thing. And I just think it's an interesting perspective for people who are tuning in to going, I am that person. I am self-taught. And that's the difference. That the people who aren't self-taught want to intellectually bully you to tell you that there's something wrong with the way that you're teaching yourself, and how dare you teach yourself. You need to be taught by the institutions. But for goodness sake, somebody had to learn this in the first place by themselves in order to share that information in the first place.
Mm. We've been in this incredibly lazy phase for my entire lifetime, which is 55 years. And it's because it's not the first thing we want to do to learn about election processes, election integrity, researching candidates. We've wanted to trust the system. We've wanted to believe that they work for us and they don't. We've always, and the reason we've just been through the horror of this COVID is because we've always wanted to rely on the integrity and the integrity of the office of general practitioners and doctors and scientists. And we've learned, and I hope you've learned, that you can't do that anymore. None of us wanted to wake up and get into politics. I'm into antiques. I was an actress and a radio host, and I was a ruthless conservative Christian capitalist. So they sound a bit at odds, but it's true. I just thought that if I worked harder than everyone else, I'd be okay in life and I could take care of my kids. And what we're learning is that not only can you just trust that politics and governance will be run in an ethical way, but neither will healthcare, right? And so doctors are also self-learning in a way that we assume they had because they went to medical school and, they got all the ticks after their names and they got approved, but we didn't realize that they were being approved by a system that was actually going to use them at this point in history we've just been through. And I'm glad to say doctors are waking up. And Professor Ian Brighthope, who's very, very active on Substack, you must follow him. You absolutely must follow him. He cares dearly about Australia. And he has shared a very short speech by Dr. Needies, and it's called His Tearful Apology to Patients. And I just want you to listen to this very short write-up by Professor Ian Brighthope. Dr. Benjamin Needies stood before the crowd, gripping the microphone with trembling hands. His voice wavered as he prepared to speak, the weight of years of silence pressing heavily upon him. He'd followed the guidelines, he'd memorized the vaccine schedule, he'd dismissed his patients' concerns without a second thought. I was wrong, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. For years, he assured his patients that vaccines were safe and effective, that reactions were rare, but he never truly understood what he was saying. He took a steadying breath before continuing. Doctors are not properly educated about vaccines. We are only taught to memorize the schedule. We don't discuss the damage they may cause. We don't acknowledge adverse reactions, Guillain-Barré syndrome, epilepsy, asthma, heart inflammation. We turn a blind eye while patients suffer. We shame them when they seek answers. And worst of all, we absolve vaccines for fair balance in medicine, ignoring conflicts of interest that should never be overlooked. Dr. Needies pressed on. In Australia, people face no jab, no pay, and no jab, no play policies, forced vaccination, job loss, no schooling. There is no full, free, and valid informed consent given to patients, no true informed refusal, no offer of an alternative. Patients do not even know when a compensation program exists for those harmed. There is no transparency regarding vaccine complications. It's absolutely deplorable, and I take responsibility for my part in it. I apologize to my patients. He wiped his damp forehead, his voice growling, more urgent. If a patient has a reaction to penicillin, we mark it in their chart and we never give it to them again. Why then do we insist on revaccinating those who suffered severe reactions? Why do vaccine placebos contain adjuvants like mercury and aluminium? Why have rates of autism, ADHD, asthma, and Guillain-Barré syndrome increased so dramatically? We spend in the US $3.5 trillion on healthcare, yet people are getting sicker. What happened to first no harm? Doctors are waking up, and doctors are admitting that they too have existed in this realm of stupidity, Jason. And I can only hope that by discussing all this, we manage to pull Australians out of this. And you have to be pulled out of it. You have to allow yourself to be pulled out of it. You have to want to be pulled out of it for your own good.
Well said. It's interesting, isn't it, that the those that push compulsory medicine tend to be on the same side of the fence that want to also push subjective identity. So, in other words, you have to take medicine, totalitarianism, but we can invent anything we like in terms of our own identity against the system. How can you have both standing points? It's hypocritical. You're either all in DEI or you're all in totalitarianism. Can't be
Yeah.
both. But of
No.
course, this is what I keep saying about the what was the dominant force, and it's not necessarily the dominant force in societies. We're now learning the infrastructure in the U.S. government, the deep state, is primarily 90% Democrat. So they have these this mentality. And of course, when you then put USAID money over it, and that goes around the world, and that controls the way that people are allowed to think. And we've seen how the censorship is used to then cut those that think differently. It's not so much a case of well, it is of forcing in hive-mindedness over free will. That's the obvious technique that they're using, the strategy. But it's enforcing this one-way form of thinking. I'm going to reveal a story in a minute in the news bulletin that's going to explain this almost psychosis in strategic thinking, or a lack of strategic thinking, as it goes towards the Green movement in the lead up to this federal election by their change in strategy. I'll explain that in a moment. But
It was all
listening,
planned. It was all planned. I actually watched a documentary with Ivor Cummings and Professor Richard Werner this morning. God knows how I must have got up even earlier than we're up now. And in 2019, in August, in Jackson Hole, which is the beautiful ski resort in America, I think it's Colorado, there was a central banking conference, and the central banks, would you believe, invited BlackRock, and BlackRock announced to them that a big crisis was coming and that it was going to help them, and then said to the central banks, we must create inflation, and then we must purchase from non-banking assets from the non-banking sector. And we see BlackRock in Australia buying up all the property. And this inflation was intentionally created, and COVID was intentionally created to be the crisis to allow it to happen, to roll us into central bank digital currency. And that's what we must resist. And the reason is, in the 70s, they did this prior, they created inflation to take America from the gold backed dollar to the petrodollar, the petrol dollar. And now they're doing it to take it from the petrodollar into central bank digital currency. So when you understand that this is engineered, and when you also understand that you're now shopping at supermarkets in Australia who are primarily owned by BlackRock, who engineered this. So if you've lost family members due to this injection rollout, you're then giving your money, your hard-earned money, and I know how hard you guys work for it, back to the people who caused their death. So you don't need stickers on your car that say F you cancer and F you suicide. You need them to say F you BlackRock, because I'm telling you, they were the ones behind this, Jason. We wanted to know, was it the king? The king doesn't have that much power. He kneels to the banks, Jason. He kneels to the money. They all do. Right? And these are the people that are behind it. And you need to understand that this is a business model. It's a ruthless one. Part of it contained mass murder and harm. And when you allow yourself to take that on board, hard as it is, acknowledge what really happened here, then we can move forward, Jason.
yep, well said. Well, the encouraging news is that Trump has banned CBDCs in the United States, at least
I'm
as far
moving.
as
I'm moving.
perfect. And many of us will want to follow. And he's also made moves to strengthen the US dollar, and he promised 100% tariffs against any BRICS currency as well. So he's determined to make the US greenback maintain its power as the global currency. But that doesn't stop those that want to resist and therefore usher in a new system. But what it's doing, of course, is it's exposing that who is for and who is against, and so the players, of course, are out there. So it's important that here in Australia we don't get a stranglehold against that system and actively work against it, knowing that it is destined to fail. But meanwhile, the termites in the Murdoch media are out there every day. It's this Daniela Elsner and Samuel Clench and Jamie Seidel. I think at least one of them is a freelance writer, but every day those three rotate with their stories of this anti-Trump rhetoric, whichever way they can possibly white at. And one of the stories today was how King Charles visiting Estonia Prince William, I should say, is a major rebuke of Donald Trump. Like seriously, they will dig anything up to tell you that the power is shifting, and it's actually to watch it is quite
It must be
to read
very
it's
well
quite humorous.
paid. That kind of shilling must be very well paid. My goodness, I'm embarrassed for them. It's this thing, isn't it? What would I have done in the Second World War? Would I have given shelter to Anne Frank, or would I have dobbed her in? Well, now we know, right? These
Yep.
people in the
Yep.
media are absolutely despicable. I used to regret that when I was on radio that I hadn't got a degree in journalism. But if that's what a degree in journalism is kicking out from the sausage factory, you can shove it. I'd rather be an independent journalist any day of the week.
Well, what you are is an autodidactic independent journalist. You've taught yourself how to be as good as anything that you've read that's supposedly professionally done. That is the whole point. I mean, what is Elon Musk but the ultimate in the autodidacts? Taught himself everything.
And the most successful people in the world did. There's a lot of people who've
Mhm.
become very successful who dropped out of college. That's another thing that seems to go hand in hand. If you're not self-teaching, what's the point of being on planet Earth, Jason, if you're not going to teach yourself about what's going on? If you
Said it.
want to live in this fantasy and tell yourself, oh, what they're telling me is true. I did it because the TV told me to. Well, good
Mhm.
for you. Yeah, I'm happy for you to live in that world. You might as well play video games all day. That's a fake world as well. I want to live in the real world and I want my eyes fully open, and that's what I do. And I hope that when we read the news headlines to you and we discuss it later on, that helps you see things a bit more clearly. Jason, I know we've got lots today. Should we get onto those bulletins?
Yes, indeed. Well, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has called a snap federal election on April 28th, claiming he needs a strong mandate to address US President Donald Trump's tariffs. I've just requested that the Governor-General dissolve Parliament and call for an election April 28. She has agreed, Carney said, referring to King Charles's third representative in Canada, a member of the British Commonwealth. Speaking in Ottawa on Sunday, Carney said the elections, which were previously scheduled for October 20, needed to be pushed up in the face of the Trump administration. We are facing the most significant crisis of our lifetimes because our President Trump's unjustified trade actions and his threats to our sovereignty, Carney said. Earlier, comedian and movie icon Mike Myers appeared in a video with the new PM to take a dig at Trump at the US-led trade war. 1 in 3 Australian adults are not working and pay no income tax because they are retired, disabled or unemployed, according to new research that blows apart commonly held beliefs about average Australian incomes. And it's less likely, or a lot less likely, I should say, than many people imagine. While the Grattan Institute revealing more than 3/4 of Australian workers earn less than the average full-time wage of $104,765 a year. The typical full-time Australian worker actually earns $90,000, and the typical Australian worker, including part-time workers, earns just $67,000. And about 1/3 of Australian adults are not paid in paid work because they are retired, have a disability, care for others, or are unemployed. So the typical adult's income from all sources is less again at just $42,000, which does date back to 2020, the latest year for which the data was available. The Institute also discovered that average middle-aged household wealth was $809,000 for those aged 41 to 64, compared to younger people at just $238,000, those aged between 25 and 40, largely based on property wealth. Despite this, the typical retired household only has about $9,000 in superannuation. Nonetheless, retirees tend to report low levels of financial stress, provided they own their own home. The Maugean skate is one of the rarest animals in Australia, called the thylacine of the sea. Its only home is Macquarie Harbour on Tasmania's west coast. Commercial fish farming in Macquarie Harbour is hastening its decline into extinction. Australia's leading environment organisations have abruptly suspended advertising campaigns attacking the Coalition's plan to introduce nuclear power and are instead funding ads accusing Anthony Albanese of signing the death warrant of this endangered species. The shift from criticising the Coalition to Labor on the cusp of an election campaign was agreed by the bosses of green groups, including the Australian Conservation Foundation, Greenpeace, the WWF Australia and the Climate Council, at what campaigners described as an emergency meeting on Saturday. It reflects widespread anger within the environment movement about Albanese's plan to rush through legislation this week with coalition support to protect the salmon industry from a long-running legal challenge over its impact on the endangered Maugean skate. Two of the key threats to the species are habitat degradation and loss, particularly documented declines in dissolved oxygen levels and in sediment health, and unintended mortalities from entanglement in fishing nets to catch other species. Queensland is set to announce a third 2032 Olympic Stadium plan in 4 years. So many are asking, will this one stick? The widely expected construction of a new 60,000-seat venue at Victoria Park will take a chunk of the largest green space near the inner city. Now, by comparison, Alan Patching led the construction of the largest ever Olympic stadium. It took just 30 months to finish the designs for Sydney's 110,000-seat stadium, build it, and hold its first major event. Meanwhile, Andrew Tate and brother Tristan returned to Romania for a court appearance. And US President Trump had been urged to attack Australia's media laws after a formal complaint described them as coercive and discriminatory. In a formal complaint, the Computer and Communications Industry Association, made up of members of Meta, Google and X and several other major companies, responded, singling out Australia's new media bargain incentive as a key example of discriminatory taxation of digital products and services towards US companies. The submission, penned by the CCIA Trades Policy Manager Amir Nasser, said Australia's extraction and redistribution of revenue from US digital suppliers to local news businesses is reported to have cost US firms $140 million US annually. And Mike Benz, the founder of the Foundation for Freedom Online, recently joined Joe Rogan on his podcast. It is now being reported that during the conversation, shared how Barack Obama was using money to USAID to pretend to send aid overseas. In actuality, Obama was laundering the taxpayer dollars and using it to train renter mobs instead. This was a scandal used during the Obama USAID era, said Benz. We were running a number of rogue USAID operations in Cuba at the time, and what he said was, I'm simply showing the American people where your tax dollars are actually going and how these things are structured in order to systematically fool you and to fool Congress and even to fool the White House. USAID pumped $1.2 billion in. Obama funded a Twitter clone that would be used to push propaganda in Cuba to inspire protests and overthrow the government. He explained how Obama overthrew many governments. So what they did is that they used the exact same setup as Twitter, the same user interface, but the whole trick about it was you have to make it look like it's coming from Cubans. And if you're going to do this operation, they started running in 2010, which was right during the Arab Spring. And a non-binary passenger has filed a lawsuit against European budget airline Ryanair for not offering gender-neutral title operations when people book flights. The passenger sought $5,400 in damages and wants Ryanair to change its policy to have gender-neutral title options. The plaintiff was seeking an out-of-court settlement, of course, but Ryanair officially refused earlier in the week, and now the case will be heard in a Berlin court. United Airlines became the first airline to offer non-binary titles back in 2019, allowing people to choose a U for undisclosed or X unspecified. Now, according to a new statewide survey from Decipher AI conducted by veteran pollster David Wolfson, a staggering 48% of likely California voters are now open to voting for a Republican governor in 2026. And Snow White has had a mediocre opening day at the US box office amid the ongoing controversy surrounding the film, where Robert De Niro's mob drama The Alto Knights has also completely tanked. The Disney live-action remake, which stars Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot, took $16 million across Friday and preview screenings from 4,200 venues across the US. Variety magazine reported or expected the projected opening figure to be more of like $45 million by comparison, and so it has a steep climb ahead to recoup its $250 million production cost. By comparison, 2023's The Little Mermaid, which had a similar budget of $240 million, made $95 million on its opening weekend, more than double what Snow White was projected to make, but even failed that by 66%. Nicola.
The news from the film industry is amusing, right? It's very sad. It's not about the arts anymore. It's not about creating art. It's so sad. I was in that industry. I guess I'm still am and will always be in that industry, as you can be an actress until you're quite old. In fact, it makes it more interesting. But yeah, a lot of shenanigans going on there. But I find it very amusing. Trump subtly, or not subtly, depending on how you look at it, exposing this Australian media, Australian government thing that's going on. Basically, the way I see it as an outside watcher is that they're pissed. They're pissed that people are not really watching establishment media news, like the ABCs and the nines, the sevens, the tens. They are, in fact, more interested in sort of online news and independent media, and who can blame them? They've been lied to for the last 5 years. And so this establishment media are essentially trying to set up this system where if those who are chattering online and on social media use their stories, they want to get paid for it. But the problem is their stories are all propaganda. So when people share their stories, what's happening is they're sharing it with sort of laughing faces and saying things like, look at this crap being peddled by the mainstream media. And so they want to be paid. And what they're starting to do, I'm noticing online, is they're removing their thumbnail. They've cracked the shits. And if you share something from one of the mainstream media sites to laugh at it, they're removing the thumbnail because how dare you? And, X hasn't paid to use it. But, of the 7 people that care what you've said that day, most of the people who might quote it are laughing at it. And so they're not making any money anymore, right? I think their advertisers must be running for the hills, and I don't blame them. But at the same time, these advertisers have nowhere to go now because they can't come here either, right? They won't come to independent media because they're too afraid. They're too afraid of being sanctioned by the government, the way they're trying to sanction these social media sites. And again, it's all monetized. And this whole effort by the Australian government proves to me that they are not in the business of sharing truth with Australians. They're only in the business of making money and using their media as propaganda. And the fact that we are 5 years in, Jason, and this is still going on is absolutely shocking to me. It's absolutely shocking that these respected news outlets, this, Murdoch media, is still behaving this way. I remember with the 2020 US election, and I was watching Fox News because at the time, from Melbourne, I stupidly believed that was the conservative side of news. Why? Because I'd been told and taught and indoctrinated that Fox was conservative, and they suddenly called Joe Biden as the winner with straight faces. And I thought, you know what? This planet just tilted on its axis. Something is very, very wrong. And that was it. I got rid of television because I realized, oh, okay, something really scary is going on here. They're prepared to lie to people and put the pleasant face on it and get the news voice on and say, oh, we're so pleased to announce Joe Biden as the projected winner. And we were all like, what? And, come on. That's my fingers snapping. Snap out of this. You can't believe these people anymore. I suggest you share this show far and wide, Jason.
Well, I hope people do, and I agree with you. And I would say this, that watching or reading mainstream news is more a case of auditing what they're saying and expecting an admission of error. But when the mainstream media is effectively part of this whole USAID scam, more or less, the fact that they were each paid or they were forgiven their licensing fees during COVID, some $27 million or something like that, each of the TV networks didn't have to pay it, then effectively you are now being paid to act as the PR company for the government.
Yeah, they've become a department. That's what's happened. They've become a government department because government pays well, because government's in charge of your money, so you don't get a say in that. So we can't view them as independent establishment media anymore. They have all become universally separate departments, useful idiots for something that we now know has been governed by the central banks and BlackRock. So why would you listen to them?
Well said. Look, as a comparison, the old Daily Telegraph newspaper used to be about 80 pages a day, and it used to cost about 80 cents. That was probably about the last time I was actually actively purchased a newspaper, and maybe that's 20 years ago, just as a comparison. So that's 1 cent per page of news. I had cause to buy a newspaper last week. I had to go and I think I said it, had to go and take a photo and had to use the date off the newspaper, and that's the accepted way you do it, almost like a ransom demand. But anyway, I picked up a newspaper. It was Sydney Morning Herald. It was as thin as you could possibly imagine. It couldn't have been 32 pages. And I opened it up, and a double page in the centre was a big ad for a major department store, and it was littered with ads. 32 pages. That newspaper cost $5.
Oh, yeah.
So what does that tell you? It's now costing you almost 20 cents a page for your news instead of 1 cent. So two things are happening. They've got nothing to report. They're literally giving up the newspaper as an advertising model. And I'll,
Captured,
and
captured, like
I'll
the doctors. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, it was never 80 cents for a cup of coffee 20 years ago, but $5 got you a cup of coffee today. I don't know who's buying a newspaper. And to be honest, when I walk into a cafe and sit down, you might see one elderly chap walk in with a Daily Telegraph newspaper, a Murdoch tabloid, and you'll see one. You might see a couple of newspapers in the corner. No one's reading them anymore.
No, because
It,
they're on
it,
their phones with their earbuds in, listening to shows like this. Hopefully, it doesn't have to be ours, but you're listening to someone having a decent conversation. I mean, I've just shared on my X account a conversation between Ivor Cummings and Professor Richard Werner, who explains the whole thing about this Jackson Hole meeting in 2019, August, with the central banks and BlackRock. And why wouldn't you educate yourself on the truth from the experts? Because we didn't know at the time, and we're still 5 years later, and most people still don't know how this started, why this started, that it's related to money. There are people that still believe there was a real pandemic and not an engineered pandemic. And so, really, their only choice right now, look, if you're someone that doesn't have time, and I understand because everyone's working, everyone's doing regular jobs for money that you've just discussed in your bulletin, Jason, most people are not reaching the average earnings in their jobs, even when they're in really good jobs. They might make the average earnings if they're on a commission basis and they work really hard. But generally, people are being massively underpaid. I see that in my own family. So they don't have time, is what I'm saying. And I completely understand that. I don't have any time either. But you do when you're driving. That's what I do. It's about time management. You can listen to reports, good reports, honest reports, people who have no ads, they're not getting paid. And you can do that in your lunch break, in your journeys, and you need to do that. You need to use your time wisely. We all want to just check out and listen to music and chill. We can't chill. Essentially, we're in an economic war. We didn't know we were in an economic war. We are. But one thing I will say to you is you must resist at all costs this central bank digital currency. You must resist at all costs the idea of a chip in your hand and you place it over and it does the same thing as a bank card. Why would you anyway allow anything into your body? And apparently in Sweden, these grain rice sized chips are actually the latest thing and people have them in their hand. And it's just extraordinary to me the amount of indoctrination and brainwashing that's gone on, Jason. These things are sold as convenience, right? So remember the last thing that was sold to you as convenience, that's convenience foods. And look what that did to your body. So let me tell you, these new banking methods like chips in hands being sold as convenience, well, they may destroy your body because it's inside your body, but they will absolutely destroy you financially, Jason.
well, it's not just financial anymore. It's certainly health. The number of people that have come to me, friends of mine that have taken the jab, that are reporting cancers within their families and friends, etc., ex-work colleagues, is devastating. Perfectly otherwise healthy people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s being struck down, time and time again. And what's interesting is people come to me and they ask me for what I know about the subject. And I know a lot about the subject.
Say,
And
how long have you got?
well, what I've done is I've taken the time to provide information and links to the best doctors who are writing the best information about these subjects, and one of the best in the business, pardon me, is Dr. William Mackis. and many will be familiar with William's work. But on his Substack, which is a paid Substack for those that want to check it out, you get the headlines, but you kind of got to pay. It's only $80 a year to get access to it or something like that. But the point is that every day he's publishing another story, generally anecdotal, of course, of an individual. That's why it's anecdotal, of their success using certain protocols that are not what the doctors are saying. So my point is, someone comes to me and says they have a particular type of cancer, and I'm able to go into William's work and take the time to find all the articles on that particular cancer and these success stories. And I say, do your own research, of course. You may want to subscribe to William's his Substack, and you may want to either take it to your doctor or your specialist or not. But it's entirely up to you. And the point is, you're doing your own due diligence. But what I find fascinating, that people will go through the process of reading all this information and be very, very impressed and want to reach out to William, etc., and ask me to make introductions and all of that stuff. But then when it comes down to a diagnosis, and then when the doctor says, well, it's slightly different, it's this, that, and the other, I find that they very happily and very quickly get back in line and do exactly what the doctor's saying. Now, that is entirely the individual's right, of course, to do that. But I just find it interesting that as much as people want to step out in the panic, it's always easier to refer responsibility back to someone else, even, of course, if it is the person you meant to trust. But the person you meant to trust, if you accept that the cause of it or the lack of cause of it, I find it unacceptable that medicine can pretend that it doesn't know the cause of certain things. So when it says we don't know why autism, where it comes from, we don't know where certain cancers come from, I don't accept that. And because science is the process of observation and testing to arrive at demonstrable and repeatable conclusions, and therefore it becomes a fact. But you can't stop science. So when a doctor, for example, only reads, like you said, Ian Brighthope, when he was saying that they only read the instructions back to you or memorize a list, how can a doctor who is in the process a scientist forget to be a scientist? Oh, he's too busy because he's seeing patients. Yeah, okay, I accept it. But my European mechanic, when I go visit him in his little garage somewhere and there's no cars in the garage, first of all, I'm grateful because I'm first in line. I go inside his office. He invites me in. He makes me a cup of coffee. We sit down and have a chat. I go, what are you up to, Albert? He says, I'm reading. I said, what are you reading? He says, I'm reading up on the latest stuff. He says, I spent half my time researching how to repair European cars.
Oh God, I wish I lived close to you. This is all part of this absolving ourselves of responsibility.
Yes.
It's called something like, it's called arrested development. So what they've done is they've propagandized us all, and we were all guilty of it at one point or another, with whether it be with healthcare, with food, with anything, with education, with trusting doctors. And we've all been indoctrinated into arresting our own development. And so we sit there in front of that big square thing, the television, and we watch shows about clever people. We watch shows about clever doctors that save people's lives. We watch shows about clever lawyers that save people from, false accusations. But what we don't seek to be is clever people ourselves. And I think it's such a shame. I think there must be so much grey matter out there, so many brain cells that are not being used. And it's such a waste. I mean, for me, the person I trust the most is myself, right? Because I've always felt, and this first happened to me when I passed my driving test. I won't brag, but I did pass the first time. And in short order, I was actually asked to star in a TV commercial for Ford where I had to be a stunt driver. So I also went and got my grade 1 stunt qualification. The person that I've always wanted to trust the most is myself. So I've wanted to know as much about any given subject as I can. Now, that's been in certain scenarios with certain things, but I don't understand how much your backs have to be pressed against the wall for people to suddenly go, shit, I'm behind the 8 ball. I don't know enough about this. And actually, in this instance, it might cost me my health. It might cost me my life. How, and look, I trusted Scott Morrison as well. I thought he looked like a fresh-faced, cuddly farmer. How wrong I was. How you can sit there and accept something like no jab, no play, no jab, no job, and not question this, farmer-looking person on television. Why would you? Who gives this person the right to tell me I can't go to work unless I inject things? I mean, just on a basic level, it doesn't make any sense, Jason. And so you
No.
have to start using your own grey matter. That's what it's for. And it's like when I first hit the road after passing that driving test, I told myself I was in a video game. And this was back in the old days of Atari. And the Terminator movies were coming out, and I used to think, if you're on the road and you just assume that at any time, someone can come veering across the street or slam on their brakes or a child can run out, you need to get into this alert mode, like you're in a video game, that something is going to come at you at some point. Then you'll always be aware. You won't be distracted, and you'll be on alert for it. And I've since passing my test, I've actually spent the rest of my life in that mode. And it's helped me in business. It's helped protect myself in the quite debauched reality of working in television and film. I had a few dodgy experiences there and I survived them. Why? Because I was more alert. And, people need to be alert because this soft, as you described the other day, Jason, sort of a Cold War against us, because it's been so hidden, so in the shadows, people have wanted to tell themselves that they're not in a situation where they're being attacked financially or physically. And I just wonder how much it will take for them to realize now's the time, right? Now's the time. I think the goal for all of us is to have the longest and healthiest life possible, to be there for our children and to advise them on how to do same. I think that's the goal for most of us. Yes, we'd like their lives to be financially easier because we want them to inherit property, but we're also entering a phase with government where it might not even be possible for them to do that, to comfortably inherit something from their hardworking parents. So if you're not going to sit up and take notice now, you are going to fall victim to this system. That's what's going to happen.
I'd like to just advance the subject a little into a certain direction, and I just want to sort of make a few comparisons. Uh, Before the weekend, I was talking to my wife about doing something with my kids at the weekend. She was off to go to an event, and I was thinking, what will I do with the kids on Sunday? We've got to go and do something for fun, and I got a bit down on myself briefly because I thought there's nothing locally that I can just sort of think about and say, oh, we haven't done that for a while. Let's go do that, just as an event. And I thought, well, that's a bit silly. We'll just go and create something. Who cares what we actually get up to? And if we go out for lunch or do something else and go and do a couple of activities and whatever. But the idea of going to the movies, we just don't do that anymore. And given that Snow White just got a 1-star rating in The Guardian, I think that's hysterical. And the Alto Nights from Robert De Niro, a Barry Levinson film, got a 2-star rating in The Guardian. Those films must be bad. So I certainly wasn't dropping $20 a ticket to go and see these things. So those things were out. Anyway, my point is we went out and we created our own fun and we had a great day. And so it was just me being sort of a bit anxious, I suppose, that I didn't get a lot of opportunities just to take the kids out and to spoil them and have some fun and just do, dad and kid things. So anyway, that happened. Now, here's where I'm going with it. There is a heroin crisis in Melbourne, and it's become headline stories today. And they're explaining in this detailed piece about the horror inside Melbourne Commission Towers, where residents live next door to heroin ground zero. And they're saying the residents there are living a daily hell where they open their front door, and even that comes with great risk. And in the article, it says it has a short but colourful history. They're talking about these heroin injecting rooms back to 2019 when the Andrews government opened the medically supervised room at Lennox Street on a trial basis, and then it was given a permanent status in March of 2023. Since then, there have been numerous incidents, including drug users passing out in the street, clutching syringes, a dead body opposite the primary school, a man entering the school grounds with a knife, and a man exposing himself outside the school fence. So it doesn't get worse than that. So park that for a moment. We published a story, or we shared a story, Nicola, earlier, I think, was it Friday or Saturday, about the the new minerals discovery of iron ore worth $5.7 trillion in Australia. And a quick calculation means that if one iron ore deposit is worth $5.7 trillion, if you divide that by the 26 million Australians, that's $220,000 for each individual Australian today.
Which they don't get. So who's getting it?
Correct. And BlackRock is a shareholder in Rio Tinto. And of course, that's where the money's going to siphon a percentage of it. 10% of it goes over to to that big guy. And I don't mean to laugh. I'm just pointing out the ridiculousness of it. So my point is, Qatar has, as we mentioned, has virtually no income taxes, free healthcare, free education, a very, very inexpensive cost of living. And it's all based on the fact of its rich mineral reserves. But Australia, we're number one in natural gas, we're number three in uranium, we have abundant oil, and we have the best coal in the world and the best iron ore. Now we seem to have the most iron ore.
So if you were a drug dealer, if you were a gangster, how do you get rid of your competition? You take them out. You take them out, Jason. Did you know that the WHO special envoy has just announced that COVID global lockdowns were a failure and will do better next time? They're going to come at us again, Jason. Yeah. They're going to come at us again. And anyone who stands in the way is going to be viewed very much like these drug cartels looking at competition. Right. And you also referenced this story in the headlines of Obama pretending to send aid overseas and really was paying for rent-a-mobs, which we were always told, I thought, was George Soros putting the bricks on the corner of the road during the Black Lives Matter riots. But perhaps it was Obama. I mean, we do know he was doing bioterrorism over there in the lab in China, without losing a minute's sleep. By the way, if you haven't seen Michelle Obama's new hairstyle, just on a very basic level, go have a look at that if you want to have a good laugh this morning. These people have been using our own money, our own funds against us, right? And I say it's a very strong phrase, but Australia is being raped and pillaged of all this stuff, and it's meant to go back to the people, and it's not. So we need politicians, we need people in office who are going to at least say this out loud in the Senate, right? What's happening to Australia's wealth? It's not coming back to Australia. Now, this is meant to be the Commonwealth, the wealth of the common people. So why is it being stolen from them, Jason?
Well, exactly. And so if you therefore could take $220,000 from this one deposit, and yes, it's massive, but you're not taking anything else. And of course, I'm just trying to illustrate the point. What do you think would happen if you could eliminate the poverty of people that end up in housing commission towers, which is such. So here we go. This is the lefty coming out of me. If you put a 20-story tower filled with a low socioeconomic scenario of people primarily suffering from mental health problems, disabilities, undereducated, I think would be the gentlest term that I can apply there. And for whatever reasons, people that have reasons why they're not at the average in society for whatever reason. Now, the system says, well, we're going to put as many people as we can on the NDIS and provide carers that take them out to events and entertain them.
But and again, inject them. Yeah.
And of course, that's the compulsory part of it. But it doesn't sustain or build a quality of life. So what I'm saying is, if all of us were given at the age of 18 a ticket that said, here's $220,000. Now, here we go. You're too young at 18 to be given $220,000 because you're going to burn it. But if you were given $220,000 that was put into a trust fund that you could get out at the age of 30, and you had purpose to realise that might be worth $350,000 in 12 years' time or $500,000 in 12 years' time, you would certainly know that your future is protected. I'm thinking of a perfect example. Priscilla Presley did that for her daughter Lisa Marie Presley with the money that she inherited from her father Elvis Presley. She kept putting back the trust fund that she couldn't get until she was 30, until she was 40. Sadly, of course, Lisa Marie died very young, and recently. That's an aside. But this is my point. It's the same argument that I often make when I talk to sports managers about football players. When you hear of another football player getting in trouble, throwing his money down a poker machine, literally pissing it up the wall, And I often say to them, what's the point of a 21-year-old kid on $1 million a year being given access to all that money? Shouldn't he draw a reasonable salary, whether it's double the average wage? Let's say they pay him $200,000, but they invest the balance of that money into a footballer's retirement fund that they access perhaps at the age of 40 or
Jason,
45.
you're talking about a utopia where we care about people. We as a society do not. They don't care if those in a lower socio-economic bracket or those who are disabled or mentally unwell, they've deliberately made them mentally unwell, deliberately. Now they've deliberately made them physically unwell. They don't care if they drop off the face of the earth. In fact, they prefer it. They're bringing in the new Australians, and I'm actually the new job I'm doing. I'm actually doing business with the new Australians, and the new Australians they're bringing in, as far as I can see, into Melbourne have money. So, as I said last week, they're bringing in the new oranges to be juiced, and they are juicing them, and they are spending, and they're very excited to be here. So they're in a completely different socio-economic bracket. Who knows? Perhaps this decades-long push to get poor fast food into Australians, to lie to them about what's good to them for them with regard to healthcare, giving away their natural resources to greedy international corporations. Perhaps it was always a plan, or perhaps it was accidental, and now they've got no one left to go to work, to pay taxes, to run the country, to be able to spend and go into debt, because debt is what makes banks successful. But I can tell you now there is going to be no system, nothing to do with, finding these resources, and it's 220,000 per person. They're not going to give anything to them. They're not going to put anything in a trust. They don't care about these people, because in their mind, you are either a contributing factor to this debt cycle or you're nothing. And they don't care. They don't want the responsibility of taking care of these people. The whole concept of social security was a lie. The only security measure it was, Jason, was pushing these people further to the outer reaches. So they would literally drop off the side of the planet. They're not interested in them because they can't generate anything for them with regard to wealth. They don't care about their mental health. Why do you think Dan Andrews put those safe injecting rooms? The one you're referring to, I think, is in Richmond, and it's opposite a primary school. And we used to talk about it on my old Sunday morning radio show because our show was in that street. Before our radio station moved closer to the city, we were in Richmond, and we used to see these people, these injectors in Dan Andrews' safe injecting room, flopping around in the streets opposite this primary school, coming out in the morning off their faces, quite frankly, with kids lining up, holding their parents' hands with their little rucksacks on, going into the primary school. And this is all part, I believe, of indoctrinating society. And if kids see this, then they might grow up and emulate it. Something, horribly, horribly dark has gone on, but I can tell you it's about as far from social security as it's possible to get. And then if you didn't believe in social security and you knew that the government didn't really have your best interests at heart, what was the next phase? The next phase was charity. But charity was also captured. 98 cents of your $1 donation to charity goes to the greedy executives. And when you hear not for profit, you think, oh, they're blessed. They don't make a profit. It all goes to help people. No, they don't make a profit because anything left over goes back to the executives. So they'll send, it was like Hillary Clinton with Haiti. They'll build 4 mud huts out of their, 12 billion, and then they'll take the rest. So you can't rely on charity to take care of people as a form of social security. So unfortunately, this is not, well, it is survival of the fittest, likely those who didn't take injections. I always say it's survival of the smartest, because if you cannot drag yourself up and educate yourself, and apparently people in the lower socioeconomic bracket are good at educating themselves about this. Apparently a large amount of them didn't vaccinate, and the reason is they didn't have to go to work because they didn't have a job, Jason. And so it's interesting what's happening. I think people, a lot of these people became homeless. A lot of these people are now living on the streets. Whatever they've tried here, Jason, hasn't worked. And people are starting to notice that it hasn't worked. And while I while I am celebrating, privately in my own work now, new Australians who are capable of spending money, they seem to be the only customers. Very few Aussies are rocking up. If Australians do rock up, they're the cashed up tradie types. They're the types who are prepared to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, get covered in concrete dust, climb on roofs, get down into shitty plumbing pipes and fix people's problems. They're the guys who've got money and they're managing to support their families. But you've got to educate yourself in this new survival of the smartest world just to be able to survive. It is a little bit dystopian. And as we move into this more digital age and they're trying to get people to, have chips and use central bank digital currency, you realize that what they're trying to do is they're trying to widen those gaps even further. Because if every time you walk through a doorway, let's just say I need to go and buy some makeup from Maya, right? And they stop me, despite the fact that I used to walk in the Maya fashion show as a television celebrity. They stopped me going into Maya during the pandemic because I didn't have that vaccine pass on my phone. And I'm too much of an honest person. I wasn't prepared to put the fake one on like lots of people did. And they stopped me at the door and I said, "You've got to be kidding." Well, what they want in the future, and they may already have it with people who've been injected, I don't know, because communications are so advanced now, more advanced than we know, is when you walk through that door, they're going to know, do they have a job? How much do they earn? How much disposable income do they have? And how much debt are they in? Do they own a property? Are they a renter? Are they married? This is the stuff they're going to know automatically without privacy, right? This is what's called, and people hear this phrase and they don't understand it. This is what's called open source. This stuff, this central bank digital currency and all of the digital stuff is what's called open source. So everyone that has their banking on their phone now, and I had to stop my daughter doing it, when you walk through these scanners to get into shops or shopping centers, or it's going to be everywhere soon, they're going to know everything about you, Jason, because everything about you is open sourced. And we cannot allow that to happen. This is why Faraday cages exist. This is why when you go into any kind of shopping center, you need to wrap your phone 3 times in aluminium foil that costs $2 at the $2 store. They're trying to get all the information on you to widen the gap, Jason. That's what's happening.
Well, it's well put together the way that you've explained that. I just want to make the observation. I think I must be a better friend to those who think that they need to support the Labor Party than the Labor Party themselves. Here I am advocating the fact that we can provide abundant wealth to all individuals across Australia, and we realise that, of course, that the mainstream party, they're not interested in that. They just want to claim that. It's like when Joe Biden said, "If you ain't black if you don't vote for me," or words to that effect. I mean, what an insult! It's literally a bully vote.
But if the government give anything away, Jason, there's always a caveat. I was disappointed to see that this Trumpet of Patriots, Clive Palmer's new party, was saying, "Oh, we're going to pay off all student debt." And that's a clever way to get people to vote for you. It's like when Pauline Hanson was rejoicing because she'd stopped a schooner of beer going up by 10 cents or $10 or whatever, 10 cents. It's ridiculous. And Albanese says, "I'll give you, $250 off your power, your energy bill." No one I know has received any money from Albanese off their energy bill. I don't know what they're talking about. They throw this out there and people go, "Oh, yay, free stuff." There is no free stuff. You take that free stuff, you go into a bracket. It is true, Jason. There is no such thing as a free lunch.
Well, that's right. Someone's got to pay for it at the end of the day, and really all it is a redistribution of income. That money comes from somewhere. It's interesting that Clive would offer to make tertiary education free again, which was a Labor policy under Gough Whitlam and reversed by Paul Keating, a Labor treasurer. And here's Clive supposedly from the far right, and he's using a far left policy. But here's the thing. Tony Abbott got elected Prime Minister saying that your electricity bill would come down by $5 by not introducing a mineral resource tax. So technically by not doing anything, by literally leaving the status quo, he won office. Anthony Albanese won office, promising $275 off your electricity bill. So in 10 years, it went up $5. Well, it was still $5 a week what they're offering. And here's Clive offering you $100,000 up front. And of course, it won't have much of an effect. It's almost like he's overpromised. Perhaps what he should have done is said, "We will buy buy you a coffee a week if you attend university, and that might be, or we'll give you free notepads or something, and that might have been enough to get them over the line. But it's almost as if whatever Clive says, he's going to be attacked for it. But then all of a sudden, pardon me, the economic fiscal conservatives in the left movement will come out and tell you that it's an unfunded cost, which I find hysterical, but everything else is not. Now, going back to this heroin story, the same people that will advocate that we can't afford to give poor people money or all of us an equal amount of money to give everyone a head start are the same people that were supporting the voice in Indigenous rights. So
and buying people drugs. So you can't take care of you, but we'll buy you drugs. Are you kidding me?
I just can't fathom how you can play and exist in the drama triangle, persecutor, rescuer, and victim, and insist that you're going to be the rescuer and always uncover all these victims, and yet not realize that you're not the rescuer, you're the victim yourself. And so this is my point. Where would we all be if by the age of 30 we all owned our own dwelling? We never had to pay rent, and we never had to pay a mortgage, and we literally had a property that we could exchange and sell and buy another one. But by the age of 30, we all owned our own homes. We could therefore not have to become slaves to the rat race, for example.
Start a business or use it as collateral to start a business. Yeah.
Anything. But again, this is my point. We spend our entire lives, like I just read out in this Grattan Institute story, that the elderly or the retirees, for example, those that own their own home, despite only having $9,000 in super, are able to manage and don't report financial stress. So it shows you that having one asset that increases in value is enough to sustain you.
Well, that's because, listen, my daughter manages a cafe, right? And there's a lot of elderly patrons. And what happens is, they say to these young people who run this cafe, oh, you've got it easy. You don't know you were born. And these young people get very upset because they don't say it, but they feel like saying back, no, you had it easy because it was 13 grand for you to buy a house and then you could set up the rest of your life. That's what they're saying inside. And that's what they're saying to me at the end of the day. If you had to work for something like maybe 5 to 10 years to buy a house, we'd have to work for 40 to 60 years to buy a house. And then, as it turns out, with a Labour government, which is starting to feel like communists, we may not even own it at the end of it, right? And so, it's not right for young people. It's not working out. They don't have a shot. There's no way they're going to own a home by 30, 40, 50, or possibly even 60. And we've done this to them. We've done this because all of the money that should have been there to help them has gone to greedy corporations. It's been a giant heist. It's extremely depressing, and we have really sold our children and our grandchildren down the river. These aren't political decisions based on who's going to pay off your student debt and give you $200 down to your energy bill. This is the future of those we love, and people aren't taking on board the seriousness of their discussions the way they should, Jason.
No, they shouldn't. And I think we've done or providing continually important perspectives on what's going on here. We are showing you both sides of the fence and possibility. I just refuse to believe that we can't think ourselves out of problems by looking at things from a different perspective. And it's really, really important that we show what's happening, that we show ways to think differently. The only way we're out of it. This is, again, where I started at the beginning of the show. We are all autodidacts. We are all talking and teaching ourselves everything that we need to know in order to not only survive, but we now have to move to a new era. Now, I know, Nicola, that you're providing, ample warnings of what's coming, but I also think we need to work out how we move from survival from survive to thrive.
Yes.
So this is the important.
I literally wrote that down as you were speaking. Survive and thrive. We need to do that, but we also need to face the fact, Jason, that because of what they've done governmentally over the last 5 years, there are going to be people that we cannot help. Now, government have already cast these people aside. They will never recover from the mental illness they've created, from the financial devastation they've created. You can look at all these resources all you want and say, oh, well, maybe we could set up trusts and do this and do that. What we need to do do is unseat these corrupt governments. We're getting very close to the end of the show, Jason, because those of us who do have to go and work need to go.
Mhm.
What would you like to say before we sign off?
Well, this is a personal note. Today, I have created, along with my eldest daughter, a brand new family tradition. I just wished her happy Aladdin Day. And that is because she has finally landed her dream job. And
Oh,
today is day one of her starting her new job. So she's going on for the big commute, she's going down to the big smoke, and she's going to make her mark on the world. And I wished her happy Aladdin Day, which means a whole new world. And a
oh,
whole new world
beautiful.
awaits. And so March 24th is Aladdin Day, and hopefully in a year's time I'll be talking about it again. But that's something that I would like to express to all of our audience. Create a new tradition for yourself, celebrate it, and watch how things change as you begin to thrive. That's my
Yes.
message for today.
It is possible, and we've all suffered, and we've all had to pivot. Pivot's a very important word, and we've all had to pivot and sort of accept jobs we may not have accepted otherwise, and go through rough periods. And it's all of us across the board. Thanks to the pandemic, I was essentially out of work for 18 months, which was absolutely crippling, and I kept fighting, and I came back from that as a middle-aged person. It's not easy as a middle-aged person to pivot with regard to work. And I also know an out-of-work former Victorian police officer who wouldn't take the injections. He looked for work for a long time. And even as a former Victorian police officer, he couldn't get, as he jokes, arrested. He tried to get a job as a security guard in a shopping mall, and they rejected him. So it's across the board. We've all suffered. It's absolute madness. So what I will say is take heart, keep trying, accept something that's possibly less than you would have accepted in the past, because we need to do a pivot, and then work your way back up. It is possible. We can do this, but we have to take responsibility for our own health, our own finances, and the fact that, as you say, we're going to educate ourselves about all this. I hope we've helped here with that on the Daily Australian with myself, Nicola Charles, and my co-host and co-producer, Jason Olbourne. Happy Monday. Go out there and work hard, people. We'll do this all over again tomorrow.